Alina, just 6 years old, asked her father a simple question. When will I go to school? But what followed would destroy her world forever. Trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape, Alina's innocence was shattered in the most horrifying way by the very man who was supposed to protect her. Pregnant, alone, and silenced by fear, this is the shocking story of a little girl who lost everything. Can she ever break free from the horrors that haunt her? Watch now, as the truth unfolds. And a monster is revealed. Alina sat quietly on the edge of the thin mattress, her tiny fingers brushing over a torn school notebook. The pages were blank, just like the promises she kept hearing. "Papa, when will I go to school?" she asked softly, eyes hopeful. Samuel looked up from the stool where he always sat after work, exhausted, sweaty, covered in flour from the bakery. He forced a tired smile. "Soon, my child, very soon." But even Alina, just 6 years old, knew what soon meant. It was a word made of dreams that never came true. Their home was a single-room shed tucked behind a small bakery in the slums of the city. The bakery paid Samuel just enough to afford that cramped space and a few pieces of dry bread every night. No beds, no privacy, just a mattress, a stool, and silence. Alina's mother had left when she was just a baby, vanished without a goodbye. Since then, it had only been the two of them. Samuel worked from dawn till dusk, mixing dough and inhaling oven smoke. Alina spent her days outside the bakery, watching school kids walk past in clean uniforms, backpacks bouncing on their shoulders. She longed to be one of them. During the day, she often helped a kind elderly woman named Auntie Blessing, who sold roasted corn by the roadside. In return, she got bits of food and the comfort of folktales whispered over the fire. She clung to those stories like oxygen, but even the warmth of Auntie Blessing's kindness couldn't mask the growing distance between her and her father. Samuel had grown quiet in recent months. Dark circles deepened beneath his eyes and his temper had turned sharp. He spoke less, smiled even less, but every now and then he'd run his fingers gently through Alina's hair with a strange kind of sorrow. One night, after a meal of dry bread and oily peanut paste, Alina rubbed her eyes. "I'm sleepy, Papa." Samuel looked at her for a long time. "Go to sleep, sweetheart. I'll join you soon." She curled up on the mattress, pulling the wrapper over her body. Within minutes she was dreaming of school books, friends, and laughter. But in the middle of that dream, something shifted. She stirred. A strange sensation crawled along her back. Her eyes opened into the darkness. A rough hand, heavy breath, a cold wave of fear she couldn't understand. She didn't scream, couldn't. Her voice, like everything else, was trapped in silence. Alina lay still. Her small fingers clutched the edge of the mattress as if it could save her from what she couldn't explain. Her heart thudded loudly in her chest, but the room stayed eerily quiet. The touch stopped, and she felt the weight shift beside her. She didn't dare move. When morning came, the sky outside was streaked with orange. The bakery fire was already crackling, and workers were shouting orders in the distance. Alina sat, up slowly. Her legs felt sore. Her body was confused. But her voice remained missing. Samuel moved around the small room like nothing had happened. He laced his worn-out shoes and buttoned his shirt, humming faintly. Then he looked over at her and smiled. "Alina," he said gently, "are you okay?" She hesitated, eyes locked on the peeling wall. "Yes, Papa," she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. "Good girl. I'll be back by evening." As he walked out the door, Alina stared at the stool he always sat on. The stool that had seen too much, heard too much. That day, she returned to Auntie Blessing's roadside stand. But something was different. The colors weren't as bright. The roasted corn didn't smell as sweet. She helped fold banana leaves in silence, barely reacting to the old woman's stories. "My child," Auntie Blessing asked, eyes narrowing, "what troubles you today?" Alina forced a tiny smile. "Nothing, Auntie. I'm just tired." But it wasn't tiredness. It was confusion. It was fear. And it was guilt, though she didn't understand why. That night, Samuel came home with leftover pastries from the bakery. He offered her a sugar-coated bun with a rare smile. "Come sit on Papa's lap," he said. Alina froze. She had always sat on his lap. It was where she heard bedtime stories, where she once felt safe. But now, the words made her stomach twist. She looked up. His eyes weren't angry. They were kind. Too kind. The kind that tried to make you forget. She obeyed. As soon as she climbed onto his lap, she felt it. A hard object beneath her, something unfamiliar and wrong. Samuel wrapped his arms around her tightly, too tightly. "You know I love you, right?" he whispered. Alina nodded, but her throat tightened. Her heart screamed no, but her mouth stayed shut. From that day forward, it became routine. Each night after work, Samuel would call her, hold her, whisper things no father should ever say. And each time, Alina became quieter, smaller, more invisible. She couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe her? Her mother was gone. She had no relatives. And her papa was the only person in the world who fed her, clothed her, and kissed her forehead at night, even if that kiss came with nightmares. Days passed in blurred silence. Alina moved like a shadow, quiet, obedient, invisible. She still helped Auntie Blessing sell roasted corn. She still smiled when customers patted her head. But the light in her eyes had dimmed. Something inside her had curled up, the way she did each night on the mattress. One afternoon, after fetching water from the public tap, Alina returned home, sweaty and dusty. She decided to take a quick bath before her father came home. Their tiny apartment had a narrow wooden bathroom door that didn't lock properly. Still, she felt safe enough to undress quickly and pour water from a small bucket over her thin frame. She had just soaked her head when the door creaked. Her heart stopped. She turned sharply, clutching her chest with both hands. Samuel stood at the door, staring. "Papa," she whispered, her voice trembling. He didn't speak. His eyes were calm. Too calm. "Come out," he said quietly. Alina froze. She didn't understand, but something told her not to say no. Her instincts screamed, but her feet moved. She stepped. Out, water dripping down her body. She stood there, shivering, confused. Her father pointed to the floor. "Pick that up," he said. A small rag lay near his feet. She bent down slowly. That's when she felt it. A grip so sudden, so strong, it knocked the breath out of her. Samuel's hands locked around her waist, pulling her toward him. She gasped, struggling instinctively, but he was stronger. Much stronger. "No, Papa, stop!" she whimpered, but her voice dissolved into the walls, and then it happened. A pain so sharp, so violent, she thought her heart would stop. She couldn't scream. She couldn't move. She just shattered. Tears fell silently as the burning pain spread between her legs. When it was over, her body collapsed onto the mattress like a broken doll. She curled up, trembling uncontrollably, wishing the world would swallow her whole. Samuel sat on the stool again, his usual place. But this time, his face was buried in his hands. He said nothing. Alina didn't look at him. She turned to the wall, burying her face into the pillow, soaking it with tears. The same pillow she once used to dream of school, of friendship, of laughter. Now all it held was pain. She wanted to hate him, She wanted to run, but she was just a child with nowhere to go and no one to run to, and worst of all, part of her still loved him because that's what he had made her believe. This is love. Alina moved slower than usual the next morning. Every step felt like fire. Her body was sore, her limbs heavy with a pain that lingered in places she didn't have names for. That day was supposed to be special. Samuel had finally managed to enroll her in school just a few months ago, after years of empty promises. It was the only good thing she'd ever wanted that actually happened, but now even school felt like a stranger. She sat at her desk in the second row, staring blankly at the chalkboard. The teacher's voice faded in and out like distant waves. The other children laughed during break time, but Alina just sat there, hands folded on the desk, knees tight together, head down. That was when her teacher, Miss Evelyn, knelt beside her. "Alina," she said gently, "are you okay, dear?" Alina blinked, as if pulled from a deep, dark tunnel. She tried to force a smile. "Yes, ma'am." Miss Evelyn's eyes searched hers. There was something there. Something broken, but buried. "If anything is wrong," Miss Evelyn whispered, "you can talk to me. I'm here." Alina nodded, but inside her heart was screaming, "You can't help me. No one can." That evening, Samuel came home early. He brought Alina a sweet bun wrapped in brown paper. "Come here," he said softly, motioning toward the stool. Alina's knees locked. She knew what was coming. She wanted to run, but where? She had no relatives, no neighbors who would care, no phone, no safety net, only Samuel. And now even the smell of flour on his shirt made her stomach turn. She walked slowly toward him, climbed onto his lap like she used to when she was little. But it didn't feel like it used to. Nothing felt like it used to. Almost immediately, she felt something press against her, something hard. His arms wrapped tightly around her, and he whispered, "You're my little princess, right?" Alina nodded without breathing. "Good girl," he murmured. It became routine. Each night followed the same script, the same stool, the same hands, the same silence. And each time, Alina disappeared a little more. She learned to float above her body, to become invisible, to survive by pretending it wasn't real. She still went to school, still helped Auntie Blessing, still smiled when someone waved, but no one saw the cracks forming beneath her skin. Because that's what abused children do. They become masters of disguise. Alina had learned how to vanish in plain sight. She became the quiet girl who always did her homework, who never caused trouble, who stayed behind to sweep the classroom. The teachers appreciated her discipline. Auntie Blessing praised her politeness. Samuel called her his angel. But none of them knew that every night that same angel curled into a ball on a thin mattress, praying for the pain to stop. One hot evening, after helping Auntie Blessing pack up the corn stand, Alina came home covered in dust and sweat. Samuel wasn't back yet. She quickly poured water into a plastic bucket and stepped into their small, creaky bathroom. The door still didn't lock properly, but she didn't care anymore. Shame had stopped following her. She had just poured the first splash of water over her head when the door creaked. This time she didn't flinch. Samuel stood there again. "Papa," she whispered, her arms crossing over her chest. He didn't respond. His eyes were cold, calculated. "Come out," he said, just like before. Her heart began to race. She stepped out, dripping, shivering, her small frame exposed and defenseless. Her skin felt too thin, too vulnerable, like paper that might tear with a single breath. Samuel pointed to a rag on the floor. "Pick that up." She didn't move. Now, she bent down. In a flash, he grabbed her waist. "No, Papa, please." He didn't stop. He didn't speak. He didn't care. The world spun. A searing pain shot through her body like a lightning bolt. It was worse than before, more brutal, more unforgiving. It tore her apart in silence. She wanted to scream, to run, to bite. But her body betrayed her. It froze. She could only cry silently as everything inside her shattered again. When it was over, she lay limp on the mattress. Blood, pain, emptiness. Samuel sat on the stool like always, staring at the floor, his face hidden in his hands. But Alina didn't. Turned toward him. She curled up, facing the wall, her pillow soaked with tears and shame. She didn't ask why. She didn't ask how could you. She just existed. Broken. Small. Forgotten in a room no one ever visited. She wanted to vanish. Not just from the apartment, but from the world. The days that followed passed like ghosts, present, but untouchable. Alina moved through the world like a shell. Her body ached. Her mind stayed far away. At school, she sat still, her books untouched, her pencil barely moving. The sounds of laughter around her were unbearable, like a cruel reminder of everything she'd lost. Then one morning, something inside her shifted. While sitting in class, Alina felt a sharp wave of nausea rise from her stomach. Her hands clutched her desk. She closed her eyes, willing the feeling to pass. It didn't. Moments later, she leaned forward and vomited across the floor. The classroom erupted in gasps. Chairs scraped. Children jumped back in disgust. Miss Evelyn rushed forward. "Alina! Alina!" wiped her mouth, dizzy and pale. "I'm fine," she whispered, barely upright. "No, you're not," Miss Evelyn said firmly. "You're going to the clinic." Alina didn't argue. At the small school clinic, the nurse helped her lie down. She asked routine questions. Alina nodded and shook her head where appropriate. But her lips stayed mostly sealed. "Has this happened before?" "No." "Any stomach pain?" "A little." After a long pause, the nurse sighed. "I'll need to run a few tests." Alina's fingers tightened on the edge of the bed. She hated doctors. She hated being touched, being examined, being exposed, but she didn't resist. Hours later, Miss Evelyn stood beside her as the nurse returned, holding a chart. "Alina," the nurse said slowly, "you're pregnant." The words were knives. Alina blinked. "What?" "You're pregnant," she repeated gently. Miss Evelyn's jaw dropped. "But she's only 14. Alina, who did this to you?" Alina looked down at her lap. I don't know." "What? Do you mean you don't know?" Miss Evelyn's voice was firm but not unkind. "Has someone been hurting you?" Alina shook her head quickly. "No, nobody, I swear." The two women exchanged looks, fear, concern, frustration swirling between them. "We need to contact your father," the nurse said. Alina's heart stopped. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling, but it was too late. An hour later, Samuel stood in the principal's office. His face twisted with rage. "What nonsense is this? My daughter? Pregnant?" The principal didn't flinch. "We need to know who's responsible." Samuel turned to Alina. "Who did this to you?" Alina stared at the floor. "I don't know." He slammed his hand against the desk. "Don't lie to me. Who is he?" Tears welled up in her eyes. "Nobody, Papa. I swear." Samuel looked at the staff. "I'll handle this. She'll talk when we get home." And with that, he grabbed her wrist and dragged her out. No one stopped him, because sometimes monsters wear the face of a father, and no one wants to believe it. As soon as the door to their tiny apartment shut, the mask Samuel wore at the school peeled off. He grabbed Alina by the shoulders and shook her violently. "How did this happen?" he hissed. "Who have you been with?" Alina trembled, her lips quivering. "Nobody, Papa. You're the only one." The words hit the air like thunder. Samuel froze. His grip loosened. Silence. Alina looked up at him, her eyes broken, but brave. "You're the only one," she whispered again. Samuel's face twitched. He stepped back, hands on his head, pacing. Why didn't you say anything? He asked, his voice low now. At the school? I didn't want them to hurt you, she said, and in that moment, he knew she still loved him, that the twisted illusion he had built still had a hold on her. He exhaled and sat on the stool. Listen to me carefully, he said, his voice suddenly calm. Nobody must ever know what you just told me. Do you hear me? Alina nodded. This pregnancy? It must go. You're too young. We'll take care of it quietly. Then you'll go back to school. Like nothing happened. She didn't respond. That evening, Samuel left and returned with a small brown paper bag. Inside were a few white pills. Take these, he ordered. Alina stared at them. She didn't know much about pregnancy, but she understood enough to know these pills weren't for healing. They were for erasing. Slowly, silently, she took them and swallowed. Over the next few days, her body rebelled. Pain racked her insides, blood soaked through rags. She couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't cry. She lay curled on the mattress, silent screams buried deep within. Samuel didn't comfort her. He didn't check on her. He just waited for it to be over. And when it was, he handed her a clean wrapper and said, "Get ready. You're going back to school." A week later, Alina returned to class. Miss Evelyn watched her carefully. "Are you feeling better now?" she asked. "Yes, Ma," Alina replied with a weak smile. But something about that smile didn't sit right. The pale skin, the quiet obedience, the sudden recovery, none of it made sense. Later, that day, Miss Evelyn whispered to the principal. "Something is very wrong." The principal sighed. "Her father says it was a family matter. It's been handled." Miss Evelyn frowned. "It doesn't feel handled." But what could she do? There was no proof, no confession, just silence, and a child trying to survive. Inside it. Miss Evelyn couldn't shake the feeling. Alina's eyes haunted her, those quiet eyes that carried too much for a 14-year-old girl. She had seen trauma before, but this was different. Days turned to weeks, and then suddenly, Alina collapsed again during morning assembly. Another wave of nausea, another trip to the school clinic, another test, another pregnancy. The staff was shocked. Whispers swirled like smoke through the school corridors. But Alina said nothing. This time, Miss Evelyn didn't ask the principal for permission. She didn't notify Samuel. She just walked straight to her desk and wrote a note. "Alina, come with me." Alina followed silently, her hands trembling. They didn't go to the nurse's office. They didn't go to the principal. They went to Miss Evelyn's home. "I made jollof rice," the teacher said softly. "You must be hungry." Alina stared at the plate, confused. She hadn't been offered kindness in a long time. At least, not without expectation. Miss Evelyn sat beside her, offering nothing but silence. After a while, she said, "You're safe here. You can talk to me. And I promise, I will not be angry." Alina's spoon paused midair. Her lips trembled. Miss Evelyn reached out gently, placing her hand over the child's. "Please, Alina, tell me the truth. Who has been hurting you?" Alina opened her mouth, and for the first time, she let it fall apart. Tears streamed down her face. Her voice cracked into pieces. "It's my father," she whispered. Miss Evelyn froze. Alina wiped her face with her sleeve. "He said he loves me, that I belong to him." The teacher's heart shattered. The room suddenly felt too quiet, too small. "Oh, Alina," she whispered. "I didn't want anyone to hurt him," the girl continued. "He works so hard, he feeds me. He wipes my tears. He says I'm his angel." Miss Evelyn's hands shook, but she steadied herself. "No," she said firmly. "That is not love, Alina. That is control. That is abuse." Alina looked at her, confused. But if I tell anyone, they'll take him away. Miss Evelyn inhaled deeply. And if you don't, he will destroy you. Alina's body wilted under the weight of the truth. But in Miss Evelyn's presence, she felt something strange for the first time in years. Not fear, but relief. That night, Miss Evelyn made a choice. She would not stay silent. She would not let Alina disappear into darkness while the world turned away. The next morning, Miss Evelyn stood at the front desk of the local police station, her hands clenched tightly around her purse strap. "I need to report a case of child abuse," she said. The officer on duty raised his head slowly. "We'll need details." So she told them everything. Alina's confessions, the repeated pregnancies, the pills, the silences, the terror behind her eyes. The officer didn't blink. Within hours, a unit was dispatched. Meanwhile, Alina sat in the corner of her small apartment, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the stool Samuel always sat on. The stool that had watched everything. The knock came at dinner time. Samuel opened the door, a cup of tea in his hand. "Mr. Samuel," one of the officers said, "you are under arrest for child abuse and sexual assault." "What?" Samuel barked, stunned. "That's nonsense! Who told you?" "You have the right to remain silent," the officer replied as they handcuffed him. Alina stood frozen. Samuel turned toward her, rage filling his eyes. "You told them! You betrayed me!" Tears poured down her cheeks. I didn't mean to. "Don't touch me!" he screamed as the officers dragged him outside. Neighbors peeked from behind windows. Whispers filled the hallway. Alina collapsed to her knees as the police van disappeared. Miss Evelyn ran up behind her, wrapping her arms tightly around the shaking girl. "It's over, Alina," she whispered. "You're safe now." But Alina didn't feel safe. She felt empty, because monsters don't always vanish when they're caged. Sometimes they stay behind, in your memories, in your body, in your guilt. Later that week, Alina was placed in a protective shelter. She was given a clean bed, a closet with clothes, 3 meals a day, but none of it felt like home. One day, she sat across from a woman in a softly lit room with lavender-colored walls. "I'm your therapist," the woman said gently. "I'm here to help you heal." Alina didn't speak. She stared at the floor. "I know it feels like everything is broken," the therapist continued, "but you're not alone." Alina blinked slowly. "He was all I had." "I know," the therapist said, "but now you have people who care, people who will protect you." Alina's eyes filled again. "I don't know how to live without him." "You will learn," the woman said softly, "and this time, without fear." And for the first time in a long time, Alina dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still a future left for her to walk toward. Weeks turned into months. Alina remained at the shelter, attending therapy sessions 3 times a week. Each session peeled back another layer of fear, another lie she had been forced to believe. At first, she barely spoke, but slowly, her voice returned. "I thought love meant doing what he said," she whispered one day to her therapist. The woman nodded gently. "Because he made you believe that. But real love doesn't hurt, Alina. It doesn't take, it protects." Alina didn't reply, but those words stayed with her. She began writing in a small notebook they gave her. At first, it was just single words: pain, confused, empty. Then came full sentences. And finally, poems. She still had nightmares, still woke up sweating, still flinched when someone walked too close. But now, there were arms that wrapped around her with care. Voices that asked, not demanded. People who listened. Miss Evelyn visited often. She brought coloring books and mango juice, sat beside Alina while she read her poems. and sometimes just held her hand in silence. One afternoon, the therapist said, "There's a school near here that takes in girls like you. You'd be safe. Would you like to start fresh?" Alina stared at the paper in her lap. Then she nodded. Yes, that single word felt like freedom. Her father, Samuel, was sentenced to 20 years in prison after the court found him guilty of multiple counts of child abuse and assault. He never once showed remorse, not even during sentencing, but Alina didn't go to the courtroom. She didn't want to, because that chapter was closed. One evening, while watching the sun set from the shelter's rooftop, Alina turned to Miss Evelyn and asked, "Do you think I'll ever be normal again?" Miss Evelyn placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were never broken, Alina. You were hurt. And healing doesn't mean going back to who you were. It means becoming someone stronger." Alina smiled softly, the wind brushing against her cheeks. "That night," she wrote in her notebook, "I am not what he did to me. I am what I choose to become, and I choose to live." She folded the page, tucked it beneath her pillow, and slept peacefully for the first time in years. No whispers in the dark. No footsteps in the hallway, just dreams, real dreams, because now she was free.